Under nearly 10 feet of Arctic ice, a silent shadow moves through the deep with dangerous confidence. It believes the black water is the perfect hiding place until 3:17 a.m., when U.S. Navy sonar cuts through the darkness like a hammer blow, exposing its trail and trapping it inside a closing tactical net. The Navy reads the vessel's own propeller rhythm like a fingerprint, turning its hidden movement into a line it can no longer escape. Every second, the distance tightens. Every pulse of sound reveals more. And beneath the crushing ice, the steel frame begins to strain under the pressure of the American intercept. In that single frozen moment, one question remains. Will one command end the threat completely, or have both sides stepped into a crisis with no clean way out? It did not begin with a flash in the sky or a sudden blast. It began quietly inside the cold corridors of Moscow as a calculated move born from frustration. After months of covert military shipments bound for Iran were blocked at the borders by the United States and its allies, Russia was forced to change direction. Plan B was activated. The focus shifted away from the burning deserts of the Middle East and toward a far more unforgiving arena: the White War Zone. Russia was not simply searching for a tactical advantage. It was searching for a way to recover prestige, a way to erase the shadow of its failure near Tehran. While Washington's attention remained locked on the Middle East, Moscow released what it believed was its ultimate card. The Belgar, a reactor-powered leviathan stretching more than 600 feet and weighing over 24,000 tons, slipped beneath the polar ice in near silence. But the Belgar was not alone. It carried the Harmony sensor grid and a group of stealth underwater drones designed to transform the seabed into a strategic barrier and tighten control over the Atlantic Gateway. Their mission was clear: build a powerful A2/AD bubble capable of cutting pressure across the Denmark Strait, one of NATO's most important northern routes. To Moscow, the earlier American military buildup in Greenland looked like a direct expansion of U.S. influence, a shield that had to be broken. Russian planners believed Washington was too focused on Iran to notice what was happening in the Arctic. They thought Greenland was only a hollow outpost, a distant position with no one seriously guarding the back door. In their minds, the high north was an open chessboard, and Russia had the first move. Then the ocean went silent. No signals, no contact, no trace. Only the terrifying stillness of the Arctic deep, as if the entire ocean was holding its breath. But the discovery of the Belgar was not luck. It was the result of a high-stakes intelligence dragnet. After Russia's position around Iran began to collapse, U.S. signals intelligence intercepted a critical burst of encrypted traffic from Russian Naval High Command to the Severodvinsk submarine base. This was not routine communication. It was the beginning of a desperate attempt to reclaim momentum. Soon after, advanced satellites detected thermal scars under the ice, unusual changes in water temperature and salinity caused by the Belgar's massive 190-megawatt reactor. The Pentagon understood the pattern immediately. Russia was making its move in the high north. The danger of that environment is almost impossible to overstate. Beneath the endless Arctic twilight, tracking a vessel under 10 feet of ice is one of the most unforgiving challenges in naval warfare. Enormous underwater ice keels, some reaching dozens of feet below the surface, hang like jagged blades in the dark. One wrong turn, one miscalculation, one collision, and a multi-billion-dollar submarine could become a silent iron grave beneath the ice. But U.S. intelligence was not about to gamble on a blind underwater chase. Instead of rushing into a direct confrontation, they chose a lower-risk and technologically dominant approach. At 3:20 a.m., as Arctic winds screamed across the frozen surface, P-8A Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft slipped out of the darkness. Flying at dangerously low altitude to stay below the radar horizon of Russian MiG-31s stationed along the Kola coast, the American crews carried out their mission with surgical precision. Their targets were Polynius, natural breaks in the ice that Moscow believed were NATO's weak spots. Through these openings, hundreds of ultra-sensitive AN/SSQ-125 sonobuoys were released, dropping into the black water like digital anchors. At 3:22 a.m., inside Ice Camp Boarfish, the Tactical Operations Center came alive. Servers hummed, screens flickered, data poured in from the buoy network. The Arctic was no longer an empty void. It had become a transparent digital battlespace, a glass chessboard hidden beneath the ice. Then the signal appeared. On the tactical displays, the rhythmic signature of the Belgar's pump jet propulsion emerged with chilling clarity. It became the ultimate high-tech hunt, less like chasing tracks through the mud and more like releasing a swarm of smart cameras into a frozen forest to follow a hidden predator. At 3:28 a.m., Belgar did not panic when its acoustic sensors detected the familiar pulse of Western sonar buoys. Instead, the Russian captain, a veteran shaped by the Cold War era, made a bold decision. He would turn his massive vessel into bait. He ordered the activation of silent hunter mode and linked the submarine's movements with the Harmony sensor network already being spread across the seabed. From Belgar's dedicated launch tubes, a swarm of Clavesson underwater drones slipped into the darkness. These were not simple scouts. They were advanced decoys built to confuse even the sharpest acoustic systems. Using low-frequency amplifiers, each drone began broadcasting a near-perfect sound profile of Belgar itself, from the deep turbine vibration to the rhythm of its propulsion. Then they split apart, moving in 3 different directions. At 3:30 a.m., inside the U.S. monitoring station, one target suddenly became 5. The combat display turned into a maze of identical signatures. 5 Belgar-like contacts moved across the screen, each following a complex path. American acoustic specialists were pushed into a dangerous guessing game, forced to divide attention and resources just to identify which signal belonged to the real vessel. Then the confusion deepened. Electronic warfare stations on the Kola Peninsula launched a high-intensity GPS spoofing operation. They were not blocking the sonar, they were bending the coordinates around it. On the P-8A Poseidons and across the Sonobuoy network, location data began shifting unpredictably. The map itself seemed to move, breaking the flow of real-time information. Now, U.S. officers were not only seeing multiple targets, they were struggling to place them accurately in the physical world. The Russian captain guided one decoy deep into the treacherous underwater canyons near Franz Josef Land. This region was a natural acoustic maze filled with rugged terrain and dense thermal layers. Sudden shifts in water temperature bent sound waves and created vast sonar blind zones. The Russians knew this labyrinth. They had mapped it. They trusted it. At 3:33 a.m., inside Ice Camp Boarfish, tension stretched tight across the room. American officers watched as the signals began fading into the void. The real vessel had less than 60 seconds before it slipped beneath the thermal layer. If they followed the wrong contact into the canyon, Belgar could disappear completely. The commander faced a critical choice: commit to one signal and risk losing the true target, or hold position and watch the Russian submarine vanish into the under-ice maze. Aboard Belgar, the captain leaned back beneath the dim red glow of the control deck. Welcome to our under-ice labyrinth. Now, the real game begins. He steered the submarine with absolute confidence. To him, the jagged canyons and thick thermal layers near Franz Josef Land formed an unbeatable acoustic fortress, a place where sonar waves twisted, broke apart, and lost their strength. He believed the Americans were still chasing false echoes in open water. But that confidence was exactly what the U.S. Navy had been waiting for. The Americans had not been fooled. They were guiding the Russian giant toward a carefully prepared containment zone. At 3:45 a.m., the unnatural silence of the Arctic was suddenly broken. At a nearby Polinia, the same ice fracture Belgar had just passed beneath, a sequence of sharp, controlled pressure bursts rolled through the deep. They were not random. U.S. micro-UUVs had already placed shape directional charges with surgical precision. The 10-foot thick ice did not simply crack. It opened in a clean geometric pattern, forming a precise breach in the polar crust. Then, through the mist of shattered ice and freezing vapor, the black steel form of the USS Delaware rose vertically from the water. The 7,800-ton submarine surfaced like a silent warning from below. By emerging directly behind Belgar's stern, Delaware delivered a clear message. The Russian illusion of Arctic control had just been broken. For the Kremlin, the threat was no longer an unseen shadow somewhere beneath the ice. It had become a physical steel reality. As Russian sonar operators rushed to make sense of the sudden shift, 2 more contacts appeared from separate strategic angles. HMS Astute and FS Sufren had been waiting in silence. Unlike Delaware, they remained beneath the surface, locked into silent hunter mode. From their hidden positions, they placed Belgar inside a precise underwater crossfire, closing every possible escape route. The Russian captain understood the truth at once. His submarine was no longer the hunter. It was trapped inside a NATO steel cage, with every possible route closing around him. In a final attempt to break free, Belgar launched jammers and acoustic decoys, trying to force an emergency escape through the under-ice maze. But with USS Delaware blocking the surface route and 2 silent Allied submarines waiting below, every exit turned into another wall. The most advanced vessel in Russia's underwater fleet had become a cornered giant beneath the Arctic ice. While the Russian crew struggled to react, the Americans moved into the most advanced phase of the operation. From the specialized bays of USS Delaware, a swarm of Lamprey-type underwater drones was released. These were not built for impact. They were built for intelligence. Powered by near-silent biodrive systems, the tiny drones slipped through Belgar's wake and attached themselves magnetically to its titanium hull. Within moments, they became almost impossible to separate from the Russian vessel, hidden against the body of the massive submarine like metal parasites. The Russian captain ordered flank speed, pushing the reactor output dangerously high as he tried to outrun the trap. What he did not realize was that the faster Belgar moved, the tighter the lampreys held on. Then the real damage began. The drones started transmitting location data, mechanical vibrations, and acoustic details directly to satellites through the breach in the ice. Belgar, Russia's most classified underwater asset, had effectively been tagged. Its greatest advantage, stealth, was gone. Every vibration from its turbines, every shift in its movement, every attempt to disappear, was now being recorded by the U.S. Navy. At 4:02 a.m., one of the Russian decoys struck a massive underwater ice keel, triggering a violent pressure burst beneath the frozen surface. The shockwave rolled through the water like a moving wall, shaking all 4 submarines caught in the zone. The 24,000-ton Belgar was thrown off balance, while the NATO vessels strained under the force of the impact. For several minutes, sonar screens went nearly blind. Turbulence, debris, and distorted sound filled the water. The steel triangle had to widen its formation to avoid damage. Belgar saw the opening and took it. The Russian captain forced the engines beyond safe limits and drove the submarine toward the final canyon, hoping the Arctic terrain would hide him one last time. But the gamble failed. Even after the shockwave, most of the lamprey drones remained attached to the hull. As Belgar disappeared into the darker waters, it was not escaping. It was broadcasting its own position in real time. Russia's Plan B had turned against itself. Its most advanced submarine had become the signal that exposed the entire mission. The engine roar faded into the pressure of the deep. But for Belgar, silence no longer meant safety. When the turbulence finally cleared and the metallic groans settled into the distance, the bridge crew understood what had happened. The submarine that had entered the Arctic as the pride of Moscow's silent fleet was no longer operating from the shadows. It was being tracked with ruthless precision. At 4:35 a.m., the Russian captain stared at the green glow of his tactical displays and saw the full shape of his defeat. No matter how deep he went, no matter how many canyons he crossed, the remaining lamprey drones kept transmitting with cold accuracy. Every time he tried to restart the mission and deploy the Harmony sensor network, USS Delaware repositioned above him, while HMS Astute and FS Suffren shifted silently below. The triangle held. Every path was blocked. Every move was answered. The captain finally understood that staying in the Arctic would only give the West more valuable acoustic data. So the order was given. Belgar began a slow, heavy ascent. There would be no blockade, no Arctic power play, no strategic breakthrough. The Russian icebreakers that had been sent to support a show of strength were now forced to guide the wounded giant back toward the Kola Peninsula. Above the ice, the first light of dawn stretched across the frozen horizon, casting long shadows over a battlefield where not a single torpedo had been launched. And yet, the outcome was absolute. At Ice Camp Boarfish, the mood was controlled and quiet. American officers watched through high-definition thermal optics as Belgar's massive conning tower broke through the surface, surrounded by jagged shards of white ice. Russia had sent a 24,000-ton symbol of brute force into the Arctic. The United States and its allies answered with something faster, smaller, and far more precise. Micro-drones, satellite links, sensor fusion, and a network trap that turned size into weakness. The Kremlin had invested in a giant designed to vanish beneath the ice. The U.S. Navy turned that giant into a moving signal. The Arctic had delivered a cold and expensive lesson. In the modern battle space, old power is not enough. Stealth can be exposed, size can become a burden, and confidence can become the first step into a trap. As USS Delaware slipped back beneath the waves, the message was unmistakable.